Well, this particular seminar has been thought of for many, I won't say years, but at least months. And so our speaker today is Dr. Erik Deumans. And you've seen a little blurb that was in our little paper this morning. And today he is going to give us the history and the current headlines of AI and what the future might bring and how AI works. And if AI is going to be the end of everything or being something great or something scary. So Dr. Erik Deumans.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. My role at the University of Florida is to manage the University of Florida supercomputer called HyperGator, which is spelled in a funny way for high performance gator. And the University of Florida is really in a unique position in the world and in the United States about teaching AI across the curriculum. There are other places like MIT or Carnegie Mellon where people do and have been doing for years all kinds of AI research, but the University of Florida is the first university that is teaching AI to every student that graduates, to make sure that when they graduate, they are what we would call knowledgeable citizens to live in this new world. And actually, AI at this time is probably the hottest topic. And there are many people saying that this is going to be as transformative as the Industrial Revolution, as transformative as the steam engine, the car, because it's going to impact everything. And I will talk about that. I'll talk about the history. But AI is definitely important. So thank you for inviting me and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about it. So let me see, do I point to this one?
Just a little.
There you go. So what I'll talk about today is first I'll give a short history of what AI is. Then I'll give some examples of what has made the headlines and how all of a sudden everybody knows about it, even though it has been around for a while. Then I'll explain a little bit how AI actually works. And then I'll tell you some stories about, the visions of what the AI might bring. And then we'll end with a discussion about, is AI going to be something great or is it going to be scary? And I can sort of give you a spoiler. It'll be a little bit of both. Some things will be great, and some things are already showing to be very helpful, and some things are scary, and they already have shown to be very scary. But the majority of what AI will do is it's going to be boring work. But that's good. So now, what is AI? Artificial intelligence. So people have been dreaming and fantasizing about machines doing intelligent things, the way we think of as intelligence in kind of a fuzzy way. I'm not going to give a big philosophical discussion of what is intelligence, but everybody sort of has a gut feeling of, people are supposed to be intelligent, and most of them are intelligent most of the time. But people have been trying to come up with how can machines duplicate that kind of intelligence? And then there are different ways to look at it. And it started in the 19th century. Ada Lovelace worked with a guy, Charles Babbage, and he was an inventor of computing machines. And she wrote a very transformative paper at the time under his leadership. She was a student and he was sort of the professor. About how machines could do complicated things. And she actually invented the notion of programming a computer, right? Even before there were computers, at that time, people had, of course, the abacus where you could sort of do calculations, but they didn't have mechanized machines. Now, Babbage did come up with machines that could do more complicated things, like the first computer type machine, and then she talked about programming it. And then the next big change is Alan Turing. He is very famous. There's a movie about him because he was the one who broke the Enigma code of the Germans, which allowed the Allies to listen in on what the Germans were doing and anticipate their actions. But he thought about, he did some breakthrough mathematical research on computers, and he came up with the Turing test. Now, the Turing test was inspired by a party game. And the party game was you take a man and a woman and you put them in separate rooms. And then the people in the party would ask questions that would be handed to both of them, the man and the woman, and then they would answer with using a typewriter. So you couldn't deduce anything from the handwriting. And then the trick of the party was to try and find out who is the man and who is the woman, right? So you would ask questions and then you would say, well, a man would typically answer it like that, or a woman would answer it like this. And then you would try to pose trick questions to sort of figure out, you know, because you don't know who is the man and who is the woman. So Turing then came up with that, and he said he believed that intelligent machines could be made, and then he would say, well, instead of having a man and a woman, we would have a human and a machine. And then we would just ask them questions, and then they would answer through some teletype messages, and then you would try to figure out which is the human and which is the machine. And the moment it is impossible by having a large, if you have a small group of 5 people in a party and you know, they can't decide which one is the machine, that doesn't mean anything. But then if you have a sufficiently large and sophisticated group of scientists and they decide, well, we cannot distinguish the answers from a human versus the machine, then at that time we would declare that the machine has passed the Turing test and is now as intelligent as a human, right? That was his test. So actually, it was clever in 1947 or whatever he invented that Turing test. It turns out that that's not that good of a test because it's pretty easy with modern AI to pass the Turing test with flying colors. So now people have come up with more sophisticated tests because there are some things that AI cannot distinguish. And to give you an example, for instance, if you ask a question to ChatGPT, there's no way you can tell whether it's a human that is writing the message or whether it's ChatGPT. However, there are some delicate nuances in the way sentences are constructed, and especially when you refer in 2 sentences to the lady did this and gave that to this man. And then he answered something. The way the he and the she refers to the right person is something that AI cannot distinguish. And it makes mistakes all the time. Because it doesn't, because when, and we'll get to this, AI doesn't know what it's talking about. And I'll tell you what that is. And then the next, another big change is John von Neumann, another great mathematician. He came up with the notion of a learning machine. And that actually is the true sort of secret behind AI. You have a machine and you can always program the machine to do something specific. And we have been, initially, we programmed robots to do something very specific. Like even when the weaving machines were invented, it was just all with mechanical things. And now the weaving machine could weave carpets or weave cloth, or it just did the right actions in exactly the right order. And now we can do this more flexibly with electronic machines. We write a program and we can do this so you can program it. But if you then find out, oh, this weaving machine always makes this mistake, or this computer always makes this mistake, well, then some programmer has to fix it. What is special, and that was what conceived by Jonathan Neumann, is if you can figure out a way for the machine to detect its own errors and then learn and not make them in, so change its own program. That's the big difference that makes AI possible. So now let's look at, this is sort of the beginning of the history, the first ideas. The moment real machines came, and this is a machine from sometime in the 50s. This is an IBM computer somewhere at an indistinct location, but there were many machines like that. This machine was in the 1940s and early 50s, the most powerful computer there was. But at this time, your cell phone is like 100,000 times more powerful than this machine. And this machine, as you can see, it filled like a room that's bigger than this one. So people kept doing all kinds of practical business things with these computers. That was very useful. And some researchers kept working on this idea of creating artificial intelligence in these machines. And so the first AI, and the first AI winter was between 1974 and 1980. So in the beginning, in the 50s and 60s, people were thinking, oh, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. It's going to be just a couple of years, and we're going to have artificial intelligence in these computers. And then in 1974 or 1980, it turned out that none of this worked. It didn't work. So that was everybody was depressed in that community. It was a small community, but everybody was depressed. And then people invented something new, which was at that time called expert systems. So they came up with some new way to do artificial intelligence. And it was essentially a little bit like a librarian, where you created a large database of facts, and then you created a software program where you could ask a question, and then the computer would look up in this database what the answer is and give you the answer. And that would then be helpful. Instead of asking a librarian to go look it all up, you could ask the computer, and the computer would give an answer that is as meaningful as what the librarian would give. So people thought, okay, that's an expert system, that's artificial intelligence. But the people that invented it made such a big stink about it that everybody had these massive expectations that, of course, it didn't live up to. It was kind of useful, but it wasn't all that impressive. And so that didn't work very well. So then there was a second winter between 1990 and 2000. And during that time, the artificial intelligence people kept inventing new algorithms. And these algorithms are the basis of what has now proven to be successful. But at the time, they were not successful at all. They didn't work. Right. And the reason they didn't work, we will see in a little bit, is because what happened in 2006. In the year 2000 is when the era of big data started. And the era of big data was made possible essentially by the evolution and the revolution in cell phone technology. All of a sudden, computers could be made that are quite powerful and very small, to the point where they're portable and they could be cell phones. But that also meant that that was the first time that some of the cell phones had a camera in it. In 2000, it wasn't a very good camera, but it was a camera. And you could make sensors, and they were pretty cheap. It was not like if you wanted to have a Hasselblad camera to make a good picture of any, flight to the moon or the astronauts walking on the moon or whatever. It was complicated to build, expensive, and then you had to have somebody who knew how to do it, and then you had to do all the photographic chemistry to make a good picture out of it. It was complicated. Now you had these sensors. Oh, thank you. And these sensors just provide all kinds of information. And that meant that people could deploy all kinds of sensors in various places. And in agriculture, for instance, people would now put little sensors in the field to measure the humidity. And that way you could have a much better feeling for where do I have to sprinkle. And they could have cameras everywhere for security systems or whatever. And the images weren't all that great, but there was lots of data. So that's the era of big data. So we had lots of data. And the second thing was, since 1990, there was this company called NVIDIA that had created chips that were used for video games. And these video games require, in order for a good video game experience, to recreate a real-life three-dimensional world scene with some realism. In the beginning, it wasn't all that great. Now we know with Pixar movies, we can do digital rendered worlds that you can have, that you can't distinguish, right? So there are some movies where you can say, oh yeah, this is a cartoon-style Pixar computer-generated movie. But there are other movies, like especially the ones in the Marvel universe, where these superheroes fly around. You have people, you see cars, you see landscapes, and then all of a sudden there's this weird creature that has totally strange face and skin and whatever. You know it's not real. They didn't make it with makeup. They would have made it with makeup 30, 40 years ago, but now it's all computer generated. And you can't tell where the real image of the background ends and where the computer generated thing comes in. And that is done by these GPUs. Now, it turns out in 2006, there were some scientists who figured out that in order to calculate the things that you need to do this AI learning computers by themselves, in order to do those mathematical operations, it's exactly the same operations that you need to do a creation of this virtual world. That's done very fast and cheap by these GPUs. And so using the compute power of GPUs and the lots of data they had, they could make the algorithms work. What happened in the 90s and 2000s when they invented the algorithms, they would say, okay, if I want to learn this computer, I have to give it at least 1,000 data points. So they gave it 1,000 data points, and then they thought, oh, now it's going to make its own predictions and it learned something. And it turns out that it was no better than just a random toss-up of a coin. You know, it was just not good enough. What they learned here is that you don't need 1,000, you need 1,000,000, you need 10 million, you need 100 million, you need 1 billion data points before it learns enough. And that's what made the big difference. And that's what we now have. So in 2006, this sort of started. In 2010, it accelerated. And then in 2022, the AI spring that we are in now started. And the big event that made this happen was November 2022, when OpenAI, which is a company that makes AI, and Microsoft Azure, which of course is Microsoft Azure, the cloud provider that runs that has all these GPUs, they trained on 5,000 GPUs a machine learning model, an AI model, on all the data that's available on the internet, which is, you know, like billions of data words. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And that's what is called a large language model. Now, for the techies, this is called machine learning and deep learning. And this thing is called a large language model. But its performance, when it was announced in November of 2022, was so impressive that the news started to write about it, and it was made available to everybody, so everybody could log in to ChatGPT and ask it some questions and ask it, write me an essay about whatever. And it would write something, and you would say, wow, this is better than I could write and it just comes on the screen and is right there. So people were very impressed. Now, the real AI people, the scientists that have been at this for decades, they're a little pissed that the press is using the word artificial intelligence for this particular flavor of machine learning. But if you would, as a reporter, if you would say, oh, look, there's this great progress in machine learning, that doesn't sound as sexy as saying, we've made great progress in artificial intelligence. So anyway, be it as it is. So now everybody's paying attention. The interesting thing is that the University of Florida was 3 years ahead of this because in 2019, we got a donation of a supercomputer from Chris Malachowski. Chris Malachowski is a graduate from electrical computer engineering over 30 years ago from the University of Florida. He then went on and became one of the co-founders of NVIDIA. Remember that company that made all the chips? So he's a very wealthy man. He's a billionaire. And he wanted to donate a supercomputer because he wanted to change the world. He is now retired from NVIDIA, and he wanted to do something meaningful with all his money. He actually first went to, NVIDIA is in San Jose in California. So he went to Stanford first, and he said, look, he wanted to go find out, what if I give them a supercomputer? Because Stanford is Stanford. Stanford is right next door, and they should know. And he came back and said, these guys don't know what they're doing. They couldn't do anything with a supercomputer if I gave it to them. So then he came and visited the University of Florida, and my boss and I gave him a tour of the University of Florida, and we had been building Hypergator since 2011. And he was very impressed with the professionalism and the way we had managed this thing. And so after this visit, he went to the provost and said, if I give you a supercomputer, what are you going to do with it? And that's when our provost said, we will create the AI university. We will make sure that every student that comes to the University of Florida will get an education, not to be a computer scientist, AI inventor, but somebody who knows how to use AI in their discipline. And that is actually what's happening now. AI is such a general tool that it's useful for everything, no matter what you're doing. If you're in medicine, if you're in linguistics, if you're trying to teach English, if you're in the fine arts, if you're trying to do physical therapy, AI can help you. And that's what we want to create, students who, when they graduate, they know their field, whatever it is, and they know how to use AI in that field in a meaningful way. And they also know how to distinguish when there is like an ethical issue about something around AI or a legal issue, so that they can have a meaningful conversation about these things. So that's where the University of Florida.
The machine recognizes the ethical and legal issues, or the staff?
No. That's the machine doesn't understand. You have to. That's where you have to say, hey, I'm using AI. AI is telling me this, but that's dangerous advice. So the people have to learn how to distinguish that, right? It's sort of the same as when you're driving a car, and you can just drive a car, and then you go on I-75, you're 120 miles per hour. Well, that's dangerous. The car can do 120 miles per hour. The car doesn't care, but, you know. So that's what's special about AI, that it's now touching, and we have examples, our entire society. You know, there's no denying. And some of it is good, some of it is bad, some of it is better, some has already improved since the 2022. There are things that immediately were discovered when it was announced. The first thing that people saw is when you start to talk to ChatGPT, it was very easy to make it hallucinate. And it would come up with all kinds of things and make it up. Just like, oh, tell me about some more details about this, and give me some scientific references. And then it would give you, and it would make up scientific references. And then you would try to click on the link for that scientific reference, and it didn't exist. But actually, what it would do is it would say, well, it's a medical reference, so the Journal of Medicine or the New England Journal of Medicine is probably a good journal. And then 2023 sounds like a good year, or 2016 sounds like a good year, so I make 2020. And then volume 22, yeah, that's a good, at page 75, and then it would make up some authors. It's like, well, that's an author, so I put them all together, and now there's no reference like that, but it sort of made all these things up. Okay, so how does AI work? So that's my little story. Yes.
No, go on.
Well, so if there is a technical question where you're losing me, then please interrupt. But after we talk, we can have some philosophical discussions. So we know how AI works, but we actually do not fully understand why it works so well. So let me explain how AI works. Let's imagine a machine or a piece of software that knows how to throw a dice, like in a game. And you know that each of the 6 possible faces of your die has a probability of 1/6. And of course, I could program the computer to generate a random number, and then say, face up, 6, 3, 2, whatever. But we can also let the computer learn that. How do we do that? Well, we provide it with data of 1,000 throws of a die. So I do 1,000 throws, and I record, and I get 164 times 1, and I get 168 times a 2, and 3 times 159, and all these numbers adds up to 1,000 trials that I had. They're not all exactly the same, but you can see that this is all around the true probability of 1/6. 1,000 divided by 6 is 166.66666, right? So that's the mathematically precise number. And so now the computer knows that once it's learned that, and then it can generate very similar results. If I now ask it, it's going to come up with a 1 around about 1/6 of the time. So the way ChatGPT is trained, like I said, it is trained on all the words that it could find on the internet. And they did this on the English language first, but we can actually do it on all languages, right? Because ChatGPT can translate to Spanish, Chinese, Arabic, all these things. It has all learned that. It had 300 billion words that were fed into the training. And like I said, on Microsoft Azure, they had 5,000 of these fastest GPUs from NVIDIA, and they trained it for about 2 months or something. And that's when ChatGPT, the first version of ChatGPT came out, and then they refined it and they improved it, but it's working. So how does that work now? It learns what is the most likely next word in an English sentence. So just like the die, but instead of with a die, you have just 6 possibilities. So the probability is 1/6. Now, if you're talking about a language, there are thousands of words, and there are billions of sentences, and you need to find out what's the probability to arrange them all, and in that it sounds like a reasonable sentence, right? So then it goes a huge number of probabilities, and so it then has a probability for what adjective goes with this particular word. Where does a verb go in a sentence? What is the order of words in English? So think about the word love. So when you have love, well, love can have multiple contexts. You can have divine love, you can have parental love, you can have love of siblings. You can have amorous love of a man and a woman. Now, if you then have a sentence, and what is the probability that you will have that you have love in the same sentence with the word sex? Now, if you're talking about divine love, it's not very likely. But if parental love is also not very likely. But if it's between an amorous couple, then it is more likely. So that's where the subtlety comes in. And you just imagine that it's more complicated than that. And the result is ChatGPT. It can make these paragraphs and these sentences that really works very well. But how come it works so well, we actually don't know. We do know that for humans to make a sentence, we have to have understanding of how it all connects. And we also know, because we can test it sort of, that AI has no clue what it's talking about. So it is artificial, but it's not intelligent in the sense, that intelligence comes from the Latin intelligere, which means to understand. And it doesn't understand. But we know that it makes very nice sentences and whole paragraphs. It can make stories that make nice sense. It can write software. If you can ask it, people who do programming in some language, Python, C, they can ask it, please write me a C program for this algorithm, for finding the largest number out of a sequence of 1,000 numbers. And it writes a little program, and then the programmer looks at it, fixes maybe some small changes, and thereby, instead of them having to type this for half an hour, they have in 2 minutes a piece of code. And programmers are using ChatGPT every day to be more productive. In the past, they would write 100 lines of code a day. Now they can do 1,000 lines of code. So it is helping them. And ChatGPT can also write poems. You can ask it. Some of them are silly, but you can refine them, and you can say, hey, I want you to be a little bit more sensitive about this, or a little bit more free-going, and then you can tell, and it come up with a poem, and you can make some really nice sounding poems. So it does, and it can write music, it makes paintings. It's pretty impressive, and we don't fully understand how it does that, but it does it. So now, scary stories and movies. So there is a movie, Megan, where the E is reverted. It's the third version of this robot. It's a story about a mom and her daughter. The mom is an engineer of an AI company that makes robots. And she creates this robot as a young girl to be a companion for her daughter. And the daughter really likes, and the robot looks like a girl. This is the robot. And then the girl is very happy as a playmate. And then, of course, all kinds of weird stuff happens. And this AI, this Megan robot, does all kinds of disastrous things, including killing people. And then another recent movie that came out just this year, Subservience. Another AI is built as a general purpose house servant. But the AI is put in the form of a beautiful woman, not a Roomba robot. The way I would think, if I want to have a house servant, I would make it look like a Roomba, right? I have a Roomba, it's pretty nice, whatever. But of course, you can imagine that if it's a beautiful woman, the dad he goes to this company and with his daughter, so his wife is sick in the hospital because she has a heart condition, and so he is just overwhelmed. He has to do his job, he has to take care of his wife, he has to take care of his daughter, so he wants a house servant. So they go to this company and they buy this robot. And the robot turns out to be this beautiful woman. So now you can sort of imagine, that things happen that have nothing to do with the AI being a house servant. And all kinds of disastrous things happen, and so that creates this situation. But the reason people make these movies is because it's very interesting, and it allows you to give a new twist to having really mean people or stupid people do things that are very nefarious, right? And so AIs by themselves wouldn't necessarily do these bad things, because we sort of feel. We sort of, by creating this companion as a young girl and this as a beautiful woman, there are all kinds of things that sort of get inspired to happen that are very emotional and that have nothing to do with answering technical questions about being an AI. And so then you can have this story that really is not part of the scope or what an AI would ever really do unless somebody programmed it that way. And so, but it sells, right? It's a nice story about something that's a little bit different twist of some evil, like you could hire an evil woman as a house servant that then, you know, tries to seduce the man or whatever, right? Okay. So what is really a possible danger of AI? Well, what we already are doing is we are building smart houses, factories, cars, airplanes that have computers in them, because these computers allow us to control these complicated machineries and these complicated things, like a modern airplane, the Boeing 787. It is a fly-by-wire machine. There's nothing mechanical about, like if you have a Cessna 172, then the steering wheel actually has mechanical cables and stuff that control the ailerons and ever. In the 787, that's not true. In the 787, everything is by computer, and the computer says, I want this motor to move this aileron a little bit this way. So you have the computer controlling all these machines, houses, factories, the light, the heating, the door locks, everything is controlled by computer. So that's where we have a computer is controlling this smart infrastructure. Now, if you put AI on that computer, then it's even easier, because now we can just talk and we can say, hey, Alexa, can you turn off the light in the stairways? And Alexa does it, because Alexa is a computer. It knows, it has this AI that understands your language, translates it in a command, turns off the light. It's all fine. But now, if somebody starts to do something mean to this system by setting a program or creating some routine inside Alexa, now Alexa could come up with something. It's like, well, if my mother-in-law comes into the house and she asks to turn off the light, turn on the heat. And then, of course, the mother-in-law is going to think, that house is crazy. I'm not coming there. And that may be exactly what the guy was trying to accomplish. But I'm just trying to say, it's not that Alexa in and of itself did something to do something to the mother-in-law. It was, right? So that's where the danger is of AI. We have now computers controlling our infrastructure. We have AI. If you program the AI in a bad way, bad things can happen. So if we now listen to AI's advice, so this is the ethical issues. If we listen to the AI's advice without checking it, like initially, if you ask ChatGPT, give me a reference to this paper, and then you don't check it and you send it as an answer to your homework, your professor's going to look at that reference and say, that reference is nonsense. Did you actually check that? No. And it can be worse, you know. Actually, there was an article from very early on after ChatGPT. There was in the New York Times, there was one of the reporters who started a conversation with ChatGPT about relationships, and somehow the conversation got, and then ChatGPT advised him, as a result of the conversation, that he should divorce his wife. And the guy was kind of shocked, and actually a year later he wrote another paper and he said, I'm still reeling from that thing, that conversation I had. So if he would have followed the advice of ChatGPT and start proceeding to divorce his wife, that would not have been good. So you have to check GPT. And so the whole point is that AI is like a tool, and you have to use it like a tool. It's the same as if you're using a drill and you sort of say, fine, you know, it's like, no, you got to measure. This is where I want to drill. This is how big the drill bit should be. And then you do it, and you do it carefully, and you stop by the time you are to the bottom of what it is. Otherwise, you drill through the floor or whatever. So it's a tool. So if we don't check what AI does, because it sort of makes these random things, it may look very nice, but they still are fundamentally random. You know, we can do immoral things, unethical things, dangerous to ourselves, to other people, to animals, or environment, or our infrastructure. There's active research going on to implement controls and checks on AI, but they are not perfect by any means. So you have to keep checking it. it is already clear that AI will impact almost everything in human activity, because no matter what you're doing, you can always get AI to help you do it a little better, a little faster, make some shortcuts, do things so it works. So it's clear that AI can help people to do many things. More AI is being invented every day, and you can find out, oh, this company is now doing this. But at the same time, there are some dangerous things that can happen. The tech sector will have to figure out how to put these controls. There are already some controls in place, a lot more now in 24 than when ChatGPT first came out in 22, because people are noticing the weird things that happen, and then it's possible to put these controls on them. And society will also have to formulate some policies to make AI trustworthy by asking the industry, by mandating the industry that they put these controls in place and that they put money into investigating that research, just like we now have regulations about car seats and seat belts, right? You cannot, as a car manufacturer, you cannot put a car on the American market that doesn't have seat belts. And that is a similar thing that will have to happen. So one of the things that is true about AI is that it is very powerful and it requires very little training. So one of the things that we can see with this modern technology is if, like 100 years ago, somebody, like a kid in high school, was really pissed at all the kids in their school, they could go to school and have a tantrum and, bully people and yell and whatever. Now they have access to machine guns and they can do disastrous things. And they don't have to have any cleverness to build that machine. They probably don't even know how the machine works, but they can get to it. And it's the same with AI. You don't have to know how AI works. You can make all kinds of nefarious things. And that is where the problem is, that these tools are helping good people do really great things, but it's equally possible for bad people to do really nefarious things because the tool's there and they can do it. And so one of the things that we need to try and figure out is, how do we balance that? And so, like I said, some things will help humanity wonderfully, and some things will happen and have disastrous effects, and some things have already happened. So that's it.
Here, here.
You had it.
Can you give us an example of really nefarious things that could happen?
Well, some nefarious things are already happening. There are companies who are using AI to weed out job applications. So lots of, you have a position open and hundreds, thousands of applicants submit their CV, and the AI goes through them and looks for some keywords or looks for some things and then says, oh, this person is not worth it. And that means that it's pretty nefarious for the person who is an applicant. It's not necessarily nefarious for society, but for the people that apply and they are really of value, it's bad for the company because they miss that special talent that really, if somebody would pay attention, would be really good and you would want to hire them, and they don't have a job. So that's just one example. But there are other more complicated things, especially when you start talking about infrastructure. If you allow infrastructure to be controlled by AI, actually, there's one example, and that was not AI, but Iran was cleaning or enriching uranium for their bomb factory. And we sent them a little nefarious computer program as part of maintenance through Siemens supply chain, which had these spinners. And it basically made so the way you do this, it's by centrifuge force. So you have the uranium that you want gets swung out to the outer edges. And that control thing was the software controlled all these centrifuges, and it just let them spin way too fast so that they started to vibrate and they all broke. And there are other things where constantly people are sending bad guys, Russians and Chinese in particular, are trying to do our electrical grid to try and make sure that stuff, too much power gets sent a certain way or not enough power, and that can cause major damage and power outages, and those are the various things.
Erik, I know you to be a spiritual person, right? I was wondering, what is your opinion on how AI aligns with spirituality?
Well, the whole fear of AI taking over the world is based on what is called scientific materialism. So since the 1700s, science has adopted this paradigm that the world starts with physics. You have atoms, matter, and then you take, and that provides you with the atoms and the basic raw materials. And then you have chemistry where you make more complicated molecules. And then you have biology where you make the molecules that are interesting and necessary for life. And then part of that life generates complicated brains. And that brain generates complicated patterns of thinking. And that's where, according to scientific materialism, awareness comes in, and spirituality. It's all scientific materialism. It's all deduction from, you start from the foundation of matter, and then things get more and more complicated and more rich, and you get the spiritual awareness. And that is wrong. The way the real world is awareness is the basis of everything. And the three-dimensional world, including all the laws of physics, are just created inside awareness, which is, you know, the word was first, as it says in the Bible. And from that, everything comes. And that's the big difference. If you believe in scientific materialism and you say, well, I take all these complicated molecules and they actually grew to this complicated brain, and the brain now has awareness, then it's very logical to assume that if I make a computer, the moment it gets more complicated than complicated enough, it might also have awareness, and so it'll be the same as we are. But that's not going to be the case, because humans and the awareness and the spirituality is first. And the physical world is just a physical world, and if we create in that physical world something that is a computer, including our brain, that we use, actually, our brains is like using an AI. And the AI is just a computer that's just like that. It's a tool. And you can do some thinking, and it sometimes creates illusions, and it misleads you. And you have to learn how to manage your brain, just like you have to learn to manage but it's not your awareness. It's not your spiritual true self.
Great atlas.
I've heard a lot about the large energy needs to run these big computers. And, what effect how is this going to be done, and what effect? Because there are people in the world that don't even have running water or electricity. And I was just wondering comments about that.
Well, that is indeed a problem, and the computer companies are still making faster chips, and the next generation is going to be a lot hotter and require more energy because it can do more things. They seem to be going ahead as if there's no global warming. At some point, this will have to come to a head, but it's not there yet. And so we will have to go through this. There will be more pain before there's going to be a resolution and a united front to do something about it. Right now, people are not doing something about it. Actually, in the last year, several billions of dollars have been invested by various companies in the United States and the rest of the world, but in the United States in particular, to build more data centers for more AI, because they think AI is going to be necessary, and so they've made it worse.
Uh, oh, so there seems to be an assumption in the last question that you were discussing, in which an awareness cannot reproduce another awareness. And it seems to me that that is a questionable assumption. Now the question. Oh, hell no. This is.
We generally are trying to keep these seminars to 45 minutes, and then however much our audience wants to ask questions. So if people need to fly, you can go ahead, but we'll continue on with questions and discussions.
Movie called Two Colors on the Space Times. Sorry.
Sorry, Al.
Well, actually, there was nothing possible. Actually, this HAL is very much like ChatGPT. Actually, ChatGPT is better than HAL. But that if you watch the movie many times, like I have, and if you read the book, HAL was programmed to do what he was doing. It was not something that he came up on itself. There was no evil spirit, no awareness. He was just programmed to do that. He was just mechanically executing his instructions. There was nothing sentient, awareness. They made it look like that because, but
in the end, it blocked the person out.
Yeah, right.
And that is the, you know.
he had the mission that the mission was more important than everything else, including human life. And so that's the decision he made. It was very logical.
Can you teach ethics and morality?
No, because it has no awareness.
The machine has no awareness.
The machine has no awareness.
Can learn from law books what has been used as a standard of ethics.
And then it would very quickly find out, well, what law case that leaves an opening that it could go through and do what it was supposed to do as its primary mission anyway, and it'll do it. There's always an exception or a loophole or whatever. You can never make it.
Second opinion.
Question. But to that discussion, I've seen several tests where they are telling AI to do something. So optimize this process and do this no matter what. And then the creator tries to revert that because they changed their mind and they realize the context changed, and they tell the machine, now do something different, forget about. And the machine lies to the creator and has a goal that the creator cannot stop. So
Right, you can't do that in real life with AI that we have now.
well, no, this is tests of learning languages and machine, where you give them an instruction at the beginning, and then it is hard for you to get the machine to stop. But whatever. But I was just gonna separate question is about, or comment is that we believe that AI is kind of on the verge of everything. As a faculty member, AI is transforming everything. Like I cannot give my students assignments anymore where I ask them for an essay or where I ask them to write something. Most of my tests are in class nowadays, and I have to tell students to, for example, they have to read the material and they have to present it in class. Otherwise, I don't know what they are learning or what they are not learning. So it's really, and the papers they write, I notice I have to go so deep. I have to do so much work because AI will tell you that an article says something like, so you put some reference that comes from an article, but you don't know if that reference, if the authors meant to this, if this is a result of the article, or this is just in the policy recommendations where the authors are saying, oh, maybe the world could be like this. If the world was like this, then this should happen. Well, AI will take that as a result of scientific research. And it's very worrisome because my students are writing papers where I cannot check every single reference and every single article and make sure that what they are references really produce that information.
There's some massive challenges that we need to figure out how to move through and go beyond. But you cannot eliminate it. It's too late. The cat's out of the bag. You have to go through it, and the only way forward is to figure out a way to incorporate AI in that learning process and whatever, right? So you have to go through. You cannot go back.
It's like we have unleashed something that is gonna is generating. I mean, I have a student who's working on 10 articles at the same time with AI. We stop there. Yeah.
Well, I had a question about, can good AI fight against bad AI, right? I mean, and just if you do have the bad consequences of AI, but like that, you can create ways. And the challenge, right? The challenge is to create. And also the challenge is to educate people like you are doing right now. Like I have a bunch of people in the board of like the organization that I work with that they don't even want to touch AI. And they're like, no, you're not going to be able to do a minute with AI. I'm like, come on. Okay. I mean, do I have to be listening to this all the time? Anyway, so, and yeah, we go through and make sure that everything everybody said was right and all of that. And that's fine. But, I mean, you have more work. Is that good or bad? It can be good in some ways. There's bad sides of it. But, there was a lot of complaints when I was going to grad school that the professors weren't really involved. So now they're having to be more involved. I think that's a good thing. Not a criticism, but something that, it's a comment. Anyways.
Okay, another one here.
Yeah, there's one there.
Hi, I'm Jane. I've been reading a lot about AI use in the persons who are lonely and isolated. And they're doing studies and on little robots. There's one called LEQ, and there's apps, obviously, companionship apps, and they're really promising. But the concern is identity theft and, that the AI robot is learning. You're creating a relationship with this either robot or on an app. And the research is looking promising in terms of more connection and that sort of thing for persons who are more isolated. And that's a real issue. And then I read it. My source is the New York Times, by the way. I always want to say what my source is. So take that for what it is. And then I just read one recently from a reporter. I think he was in his late 20s or 30s, and he tried 3 or 4 AI dating apps. So the AI was creating text messages for him, right? And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm glad I'm as old as I am. That would have been really and then they would meet in some of it would be really kind of, stilted, some of the texts, and then they met in person and they had no chemistry, but they had the AI had chemistry, right? The two people, it was an AI dating system, so that's what's interesting too.
Yeah, here's one.
It's regulatory agencies. What, if any, regulatory agency are looking at looking at control or quality of data that is produced by AI.
Yeah. So
If we're still recording.
So the question was, what regulatory agencies are looking at this? Well, the Office of Science, Technology and Policy in the White House is very concerned about this, and NIST is also. So I actually work with NIST on compliance, and so they have a very strong activity on trying to come up with guidance, and they have like a public comment period on some of their documents to come up and eventually create legislation that will require companies to do certain things, like I was saying about the seat belts. But right now we still need to come up with credible tests. For instance, if somebody submits homework with AI, there are some tools that can help you recognize whether it was written by an AI or not, but they're not fail-safe by any means. So there is research going on to try and make that better. And then once we have tests that are credible and reliable, then it's possible to create legislation that requires that before any company releases a new product or a new app, that it passes these requirements. So that is a process that's ongoing, but all of this is happening so fast that especially legislative activity is surely not keeping up.
I was just wondering, what are the extent of applications on cell phones when they said AI on cell phones?
Well, the latest iPhone, what is it, 14 or 16, is like fully AI integrated. Every application you put on there is integrated with AI. Your phone knows everything you do and will guide you and connect. And if you say something, it might say, oh, you had this message to this person about this same topic. Did you know that? Do you want to use that? Or whatever. So AI is on your cell phone. It actually doesn't run on your cell phone. It's connected through a cloud service, but it's there.
If we wear you out, let us know.
It's okay. It's okay.
So I work for a regulatory agency, and one of the brilliant things about AI is that it lets you see relationships that you didn't know existed, like trying to figure out how rainfall connects to springs, because there's cracks running through the ground that you can't see that feed from a faraway place to a spring. Anyway, one of the things that I've come across is you mentioned NVIDIA, and they've got their foot so deep in the door that a lot of programming that exists depends on having an NVIDIA card. And that's like the most expensive card. And of course, governments don't want to pay for the most expensive card. So what I'm wondering is, is there a way to make the AI, platform agnostic, where it doesn't matter where you come?
Well, actually, I think for the previous 2 decades, the 2000s and the 2010s, NVIDIA got a massive leapfrog ahead of everybody else in the GPU area because of their CUDA. Because because of their CUDA. They have a programming environment called CUDA, C-U-D-A. It's a compute unified device application environment. And so if you wanted to use a GPU, you had to program it. And if you bought a new computer, then you either bought the NVIDIA chip again, because then your program would run, or if you bought a competitor GPU from AMD or from Intel, then you would have to reprogram it. And that's a lot of effort. It's very expensive. But now there is a little bit, but that's because there were lots of applications, but there was not one big killer app. Now there actually is one big killer app, and it is AI. So what I think is going to happen is there are going to be some companies that are going to hire some really smart programmers, and they are going to say, okay, I can develop a large language model like ChatGPT, and I don't need CUDA. I'll just get my programmers, I program it afresh, brand new for this AMD processor, and I'm going to sell it as the new ChatGPT competitor. And you can buy it on this machine that has AMD processors in it, and it's 10 times cheaper than NVIDIA, and they're going to get a market share. In the past, you couldn't do that because everybody had to write their own programs. But now many people, lots of applications, they just need to run AI. They don't want to do any programming. They just want to be able to talk to it. And so I think that's what's going to happen.
Okay, what theme there of predicting the future? So, I'm sure you've seen this book. The singularity is near. So he's predicting biology and AI merge, or machine learning and biology, humans and machine learning merge. Do you have any view of this? Is this impossible? Is this fantasy?
It's the same answer of spirituality. It's like that scenario is the logical scenario in the scientific materialism paradigm, which is wrong. So it won't work out that way.
I guess philosophically, then you're saying that there'd be a difference. But do you think the physical merging of the two would be possible? Do you see any signs of it?
Oh, physical, like we're going to have bionic people? Yeah, sure. People are already having that. I mean, people who have like amputated legs, they get some of them are purely mechanical, but some of them have some intelligence built in to make it work better. So they have, this is the Bionic Man from the 1960s show. People are making that now. And actually, the latest Ray-Ban glasses, Google had some Google glasses that were a flop because they were heavy and they didn't work very well. But now you have some cool Ray-Ban glasses that have AI connected in and you can just walk in, and my camera takes a picture of everybody, does a Google search on all your Facebook places and all your dirty little secrets. And while I'm sitting here talking, I can find out, what did Pradeep do yesterday or whatever.
Real quick, so you said that the phone knows everything about it. Well, who else does, if the phone does? Who's reading the information? Yeah.
Well, so this is a fundamental problem in our mental and collective. So the Chinese government makes it very clear to all Chinese citizens that Big Brother is watching. Everything that they do on social media, on the internet, on their phones, it's the property of the state. And as a result, TikTok and anything you do on TikTok is open to the Chinese government, which is why the United States government is banning, or has this law that goes into effect, what is it, today or tomorrow, whatever? They're supposed to, so either TikTok has to be sold to an American-owned company, or it'll be banned in the United States. And there's a big debate about that. But philosophically, there's a little bit of a weird thing about that, in that TikTok has all this data going to the Chinese government, which we don't like. However, Facebook and Amazon and Google and Twitter and X, there we as citizens in the United States voluntarily give all our data to them. But they are not the government, they're our good friends, the big business. I was like, oh.
Is there something we can do as individuals or organizations that can, take this into the brighter side?
Talk to your representatives to make laws that basically say there has to be a privacy protection law, just like the European GDPR, where companies have to agree with you, we are taking your data and we keep a record of your data and you have the right to forget. so that if at some point you say, I want you to delete my data, they are legally required to delete it. So in European countries, that's the case. GDPR does that. And Europe and American companies comply with that law because otherwise they can't sell in the European Union. So it's not like we don't know how to do this, but in America, the big people like Bezos and Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, they have much more power over our Senate and Congress that it doesn't happen here. But we should force them.
Okay.
Thank you.